it's 7 days, but some papers only get the Sundays or only get the dailies. So you have to tell a story that works with reading those independent of each other. And some papers only get the bottom two of the 3 rows of the Sunday. So yeah, so you have to tell a story that can be read over either, what is that, 24? So a story that can be read over either 32 panels or 6.
Hey, thanks for listening. Well, welcome to, I guess, the first bonus Tradecraft episode. As I mentioned, past guests have come back, and to accommodate this, I'll have to post some of these bonus episodes on Fridays just to keep the ball rolling, because I have episodes recorded and lined up that will take me through the year. So there will be Friday episodes here and there. Like I've said before, the podcast is free, and I only intend it to be free. And the reason I say all this is that I'm dealing with a lot of externalities that having 2 episodes a week is really rough on my time. And I need to figure other ways to make this somewhat balance out. So I'm going to activate the memberships on Substack, and I'm going to set it at $5 a month. And this doesn't stop accessibility to episodes coming out. So you can get them on Substack, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Stitcher for free. However you like to listen to it, that's totally cool by me. I don't want to break that up. But if you dig the show, and if you've been listening for a while, and I hope you have, and I hope you will, maybe you can go over to Substack and click on the paid membership. Help me out, because there are time costs and technical costs, which there are many of that are so baked into being able to do a podcast these days, that I would like to be able to go to a few comic conventions a year and record there. And that would be great, because I'm never going to be able to sit face to face with certain people unless they travel. We'll see how it all works. I'm not going to be Joe Rogan. I'm not going to make a fortune on this. I'm going to have creative conversations with people for as long as I possibly can. And doing that with the community support would be fantastic. Speaking of community support, Dan Schkade is today's guest, and Dan's been on the show before, and ta-da, he's the new writer artist for Flash Gordon. There's links in the description. Go read Flash Gordon every day. It's totally free. Yeah, and then we also talked about his other projects, which there are links to as well. So Dan's great. I hope you enjoy our talk. This is me with Dan Schkade.
I work nights now, and so I normally sleep in the late morning and early afternoon.
Okay.
But this morning, Flash was announced, so I spent a lot of time I would have spent sleeping, like answering messages.
Yeah.
So I'm getting like you'll see a spike when you tell me that we're like recording for the podcast.
We're recording now, man.
We're just trying to find the right narrative spot to jump in, right?
Isn't that the case of the story? Get in late, get out early.
Yeah.
I'm not good at the getting out early part. I'll be honest.
Well, I mean, when you're always dealing with economy.
Yeah.
You're always dealing with, especially attention economy.
Mm-hmm.
How long will this kind of sustain this interest, this tension with the viewer? And it's something that is the name of the game when it comes to writing comics.
Yeah.
Is how when you have the space economy in addition to the attention economy, how do we make the the page crackle enough
Mm-hmm.
that it'll keep you there. This little, you know, bird feeder peanut butter apparatus that keeps the readers, you know, buzzing around the story. Um, and that's, uh, I mean, I just hate wasting people's time.
Sure.
Is my big thing. I hate, my big fear is that people are being nice and listening to me,
Right.
and I feel like my comics reflect that.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I initially I will say yes, that's always the case. People, when it comes to when you are carving out something new, people are always being nice because those are the people who know you.
Mm-hmm.
And the the hope, the goal, the dream is to extend beyond that circle of acquaintances into the unknown, sort of sea out there, and hope that they buy into the same thing that you're putting out. And and that is you, you know which is the hard part about being a creative, an artist, is that it's like, okay, I guess I'm being judged, like it's a weird, terrifying, dance.
Well, it's so hard to find the level of that, that's safe for you and healthy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are some people who should never ever read the comments. Like, there are people who should never even meet their audience.
Right.
And there are people whose art is almost tied to their ability to interact with their audience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, uh, if it was somehow possible for a cartoonist to live stream their comics, like to make the comic as people are watching at a fast enough pace that they're actually getting the story,
Yeah.
I think there are some artists where that would be the ideal outlet for their creativity, is this jazz level flow that people are directly engaged in. Um, and I don't know. I think that's part of, I think it's part of why it's important to not hold artists accountable to one specific way of doing it,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like, then this is always going to be the case when you're dealing with a multi-generational talent pool. But I think older artists, older creators, kind of have that mentality, that there's one way to be a professional, and there's also one way to be a creator.
Yeah.
Um, and just, some people are monastic. Some people like need to be alone with the drippy candles,
uh,
and you can't fight that.
yeah, I mean, and it's funny that one way that you're referring to, it's strange because it's this very sort of like centrist kind of point of view that we all have. We have a very, like, we're naturally born with the centrist point of view, and the sort of the feedback loop is, I'm here, I've made it this far, I've done this, this is the way it works, so that's the way. So that's why we have, this sort of plethora of billionaires out there telling everyone how to do stuff in the world, because they're conflating the ability to make very large sums of money with being right about everything. And it's like, and so like, we can dial that back a bit to the 55-year-old creative who's like, well, this is the way to do it. Now, I don't put myself in that category, just because of the fact that I've had to reinvent myself so many times,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think there is one way to do it, because I've had to change. Extenuating circumstances have forced me to change. And I think that, as you say, the generational things, well, that's where the change always comes from the younger point of view, on by and large, and the
Mm-hmm.
elder statespeople of the world always have to go like, okay, well, we will make these accommodations, and eventually those accommodations become de rigueur,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually they have to make the changes for the next waves coming in. I mean, it's just the ocean chipping away at the beach kind of thing.
It's true, and I find the exceptions to that really cool. Like, there are creators, who who have stayed plugged in to the way things are changing and
Totally.
continue to put out, like, I think Kyle Baker is a great example of this.
Mm-hmm.
The way that Kyle Baker over the course of his career has embraced not just digital art, which he was pretty ahead of the game on, but also just different storytelling formats that work better for the internet,
Yeah.
for without going the path that is most common, without just doing uh, the Kickstarter, Patreon, rinse, repeat route, which is very reliable. A lot of people do that really well.
Yeah.
In fact, Tom Scioli, uh, I don't know anybody else who reads his comics, so I never say his name out loud. But he just had a new comic, Witchman, successfully funded on Kickstarter. I love his work, so I love people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exciting to see somebody like Kyle Baker, a guy who's been a creative literally longer than I've been alive,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
be like more on the ball than some people in my cohort. You know.
He's, and I mean, I was talking with Duncan Fegredo just the other day, and I put Duncan in that category of a person who is constantly in the struggle, like putting themselves in the struggle of discomfort to do something, and that something always ends up being kind of fantastic because of that level of discomfort. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think Kyle is like that. It's funny because he was like notorious when I was in art school. I think Saturn just came out, and so we were all just kind of like, wow, man. And I think, I'm pretty sure Kyle went also to the same school I went to. So so he had this sort of legendary status in the school. And then I think during my junior or senior year, he came and he spoke in one of the classes I took. I had this amazing teacher, Bob Stewart, who was an historian of comics.
Oh.
And Bob brought all these amazing people in the class, but Kyle was one of them. And man, it was truly kind of like one of those really revelatory moments of having someone like, I mean, he brought Kurtzman in, which was great, because you're like, oh, but Kurtzman was teaching at the school. I think maybe Kurtzman had just stopped teaching, but then he came back to come to this class. But it was just one of those things. But Kyle, man, like, yeah, you're right. I mean, he is one of those people who, I think if you can embrace the discomfort, as they say, or they say like in special operations, embrace the suck,
Yeah.
like you can get through it.
No, there's a big, some of that is deadlines, crunches sometimes generate your best work. I definitely feel like I'm that same way. But also limitations encourage creativity. Like obviously I'm doing Flash Gordon now, which is a brand new format. Doing a newspaper strip is a new format for me. I've done a weekly comic before in Lavender Jack. So I've had one level of understanding. Like you start out just doing a monthly comic,
Mm-hmm.
and you know how to condense into an issue. And so with Lavender Jack, you're condensing into a week, which is about like a third of an issue a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Flash Gordon, where you're condensing it into panels,
Like a third of a page a day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the type has to be really big because you're in newspapers, and
Mhm.
honestly my type's probably on the small side of what's legible in papers, so I'm even pushing that dimension. But it forces you to really wean out the extraneous stuff. Like how can I how the thing that made Kurtzman such a genius, how can I like turn a whole fight scene into 2 panels?
Yeah, totally.
And you come up with some really cool stuff there. Like I'm using captions more than I ever have before, like to really generate a lot of plot material that is important to the story, but it's not important enough that I can waste a whole day on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty exciting stuff, really.
Yeah, it's almost like a bit of a reverse of the picture tell 1,000 words thing, where you're like, well, the caption is going to tell like 4 days worth of drawing. So
Right.
I'm just going to do that.
And then on top of that, you have these little squares you get to work in for
Mhm.
the panels. They're very small panels, and so you like between the captions and the visuals, like you start thinking about the captions like it's a radio play.
Mhm.
Like how can I elegantly suggest a world outside of the nothing we're able to see?
Yeah.
And then you also start thinking like a filmmaker on a budget where all right, we don't have an army, but we can put like three foregrounded guys on the left side of the panel, and then have the characters look at the right side of the panel, being like, "Wow, what a big army!"
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and if you do it right, you just like the audience draws the army for you.
Totally. Yeah. No. Totally. It brings out the concept of the iceberg story philosophy. I don't know if you're aware of that. So the concept of the iceberg story philosophy is because we know we see what 10% of an iceberg. So the idea is that that's what you show the reader.
Mm.
So, and it's, I learned about it, in writing prose, is that you just need to show them enough that the reader will go, oh, like there's a whole thing here, but you don't have to sit and explain the whole thing, or in this case, show the whole thing. So the reader goes, oh, okay, cool. I'm in. I'm totally in.
Boy, that's so true. I mean, that's what drew me so much to hard-boiled detective fiction in the first place. Is a thing like he had a face like a busted tail light.
Yeah.
Uh, like um, the and it's the same thing you get out of poetry. It's the same thing you get out of like rap lyrics. Like suggesting the 98% of the iceberg.
Yeah.
That's a real. I never heard the iceberg imagery applied to that. I really like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and to me, it's something that is truly applicable in what you have as such a limited, space
Mm.
to tell things. So you get that opportunity. Um, Hopping sideways in this one, how do you how do you reckon then with Hal Foster? Like how it doesn't seem to me that Foster was trying to fast forward through things. Like I always felt like, because I grew up reading that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and like it was a highlight to get, okay, cool, I get to look at Valiant, because it was a beautiful, and but I never felt like he was just kind of, okay, hinting at things. Like he was like, I'm putting it all in here, and you just get to read for 7 months to figure out what this is.
Well, I mean, nothing against Alex Raymond, who's like the more I delve into Alex Raymond's work, the more just kind of floored I am by the amount of the uh, the amount of storytelling that's contained in his figures as a writer. And I assume he had scripting assistants at various points, but
Probably.
as a writer in uh, those first 10 years or so, um, the first six of which are really the ones I'm pulling from. The story does kind of lurch around a little sometimes. Like we do glaze over stuff that might have been interesting to sit with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually have been pulling from Hal Foster a lot. I
Oh,
have
cool.
this, like just off camera, I have this big, I think Fantagraphics a couple years ago put out sort of a tabloid sized full color collection of some Prince Valiant comics. And the language is so beautiful. The language is so
Yeah.
it's poetic and it's kind of playful, but it can also be quite serious. It's so charismatic. Like I just know I'm going to look back at these first batch of Flash Gordon strips I'm doing and feel like I'm either over or under writing it because I'm trying to hit this really specific, beautiful way of doing non-diegetic, language in the
Mm-hmm.
comic. That I mean, it's amazing when you're reading Prince Valiant. You feel you feel enmeshed in this whole world.
Yeah.
It's absolute top tier iceberg.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's an interest. I mean, it's it's iceberg. It's an iceberg in a planet with a different gravity well or gravity
Yeah.
force. So you see a lot more of that iceberg.
Yes.
It just floats on top. It's maybe you can make an iceberg out of like hydrogen or helium, and it would float right there on top. But so
An airberg.
how did it come? I mean, an airberg. Ooh, write that down.
Mm.
You should use that. So how did Flash Gordon come about? Because I mean, listen, for those people who are putting the pieces together, that you are doing Flash Gordon King features like in the papers. This is like it's like insanely cool for anybody who grew up with a love for strips, because they're even more rare, you know, than comic book creation in a sense, because there's such a limited real estate available. So it's like, who gets in?
Yeah.
So how did it happen, man?
Well, I a couple years ago, when Lavender Jack was, we were heading into Lavender Jack's last season. I, um, I'd had a nice steady gig for a couple years, which is like amazing in comics. I felt so lucky for that, and I thought, well, I've developed a sort of a skill set here. So I reached out to T at King Features, who I'd met socially, um, and I'd seen what she was doing over there with um, Jules Rivera taking over Mark Trail. I just saw some really exciting stuff happening at King, and so I said, hey, if I just sent a cold email, like if if you want I think I said something like, if you want somebody to show Rip Kirby how to use Instagram, let me know. Um,
I love that.
and then we had worked together briefly on a Flash Gordon anthology that they were doing called Flash Forward. It was 40 different creators / creative teams doing single, like one and done Flash Gordon strips, non-canonical, just kind of not connected to each other. Just, here you get one Sunday, do a Flash Gordon thing. What do you got? And so some people did very traditional stuff. Some people did like queer romances or comedy strips, or uh, just really, really quite cool thing with incredibly diverse styles. I think the two people I was sandwiched between when my strip came out was Kel McDonald and Dennis Kitchen.
Okay.
Um, so I was invited to do one of those, and so I had worked. I had done one Flash thing for them, and it was I think that's probably more comorbid than causative. I don't think that it wasn't like that was a dry run or anything. I don't think they knew they were going to do Flash yet.
Right.
But it however that ended up panning out, about 6 months after I sent that cold email, T got in touch to say, like, hey, we'd like you to pitch for something. Can you take a meeting with us? And I went through their comics, and I tried to figure out which one it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Like who's changing, and my thought was, I think it's going to be Judge Parker.
Okay.
And then my ideal, and I'd love to talk about this later, was the Phantom. I'm like, okay, it kind of feels like maybe the Phantom's switching up, which I don't believe was the case. And the last thing I thought that it was going to be was Flash Gordon.
Sure.
So I obviously said yes to pitching for it. There were a couple different people that they were reaching out to, and I just did a deep dive into Flash. I read as much of the original years as I could, because I knew that that's what I wanted to mine from.
Mm-hmm.
The first Like the place my mind went right to was like doing Batman the animated series for Flash Gordon,
Okay. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
something that's very very traditional to it, but that feels modern. Um, and so I pitched basically that, something that was fresh but very Fidelius, and um, and over the next year or so, we kind of went back and forth on it until finally I was the guy.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It's so strange because like you don't. I mean, like almost every person who's into comics, knows Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
And maybe a lot of people's introduction might be the movie,
Mm-hmm.
which is amazing in its own way.
Yeah.
But like it is, I mean, it's just like Superman or Spider-Man. Flash Gordon is just this sort of like iconic, chiseled in stone hero
Mm-hmm.
in the pantheon. Like we all know this character to one degree or another, but time has sort of erased, that sort of the continuity aspect of who that character is.
That's true. He's uh, there is a Citizen Kane effect where, because everything has borrowed from Flash Gordon
Mm-hmm.
so much, that when you go back to the original, it can seem like you're only seeing what's been pulled from it. You don't see what's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And one quite useful thing about that flash forward anthology was seeing 40 different creative teams do a little bit of Flash Gordon, a lot of whom are younger creators. We had queer creators of color who would not have worked on Flash before,
Right.
or been that familiar with Flash in some cases, um, or as well as old teams that have known him their whole lives. There's I got to see what people kind of think of him. Think of Flash the character specifically, but also think of the world at large. And there was a trend towards, he's corny, he's outdated, he's kind of a boob, he's like that was the uh, like the most common characterization that I kind of picked up was that he was like Mr. Peanut Butter from BoJack Horseman.
Okay.
um, and uh, and honestly, the initial version I pitched was a little more in that direction. Like I was Flash was not quite a Kronk, but again in that direction. But King responded with, we don't want funny. We want a real. We want a hero. We want a straightforward, classical heroic character. And so that made me revisit it, because my thought was always that Flash is a hero. He's a really good person.
Mm-hmm.
He always kind of approaches a problem with his hand extended.
Yeah, sure.
And so now that I had that in mind, it's like, all right, so forget about the history for a little bit, because Flash Gordon doesn't know he's Flash Gordon. He doesn't know he's this iconic comic book character who's been around for 90 years.
Mm-hmm.
Flash is just kind of living one long weird day. He didn't plan on going into space. He didn't plan on becoming one of the figureheads of a alien revolutionary war.
Right.
But every little step of the way just kind of made sense. He's going with the flow, and so once you kind of enter that headspace where he's not a type, he's a guy.
Yep.
Who happens to exemplify that type. I don't know. All of a sudden, I felt like I was getting some pretty interesting places with it, in a place that isn't commenting on Flash Gordon, but just is Flash Gordon.
Yeah. No, and I can get the impulse on the commentary, because it's sort of like, things everything becomes out of time eventually. So so commentary becomes the sort of like easiest tool to kind of grab. And but I think, and it's so interesting because I'm rereading John Carter. So it's my
Mm,
bedside. So if I'm between, books or whatever, for a few nights I'll sit and I'll just read through some John Carter stuff and then go on to the next thing. So it's just there for everyone. It's like a 3-inch thick, collection of all this stuff. So it's going to be there for a while.
mhm.
And, yeah, but you think about that and you think about, was the DC character? I'm blanking on the
Warlord?
no, the one. Oh, I love the Warlord. Which is, yeah, very much of that too.
Oh, Adam Strange.
Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, so all these characters are of maybe, I guess probably Carter was probably the first of this lot, and they've just all sort of been some version of this kind of theme, and it's kind of cool to see like all these interpretations. But now, like, you're getting to take that source material and say, okay, here we're gonna, I'm going to tell this story, and with what you showed me, like, it's amazing. Like, it's very much like, it's not this sort of like beginning, here we are, day one, moment one, and we're in the adventure. The adventure's happening.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I was sort of inspired by like stuff like All Star Superman,
Mm-hmm.
where you're in a world that's pre-established, relationships that are pre-established, and you kind of you have an idea of what the lore in this version of the story is. Um, Not all the points, but you kind of have an idea of where you are, and it makes it so that it's not a day one origin story, but hopefully is still accessible,
Mm-hmm.
um, in kind of that that wonderful uh, magnetic, charismatic format where you're meeting characters on like the busiest day of their year, and there isn't time to linger with them. There isn't time to to really. I mean, this was in my pitch. It's not meditations in a lonesome universe, Gordon. It's
Right.
Flash Gordon. Things are happening fast. The stakes are big. Something's on fire or blowing up or full of electricity. We and I think that energy is infectious, even if you don't know like what the kingdom of Phrygia is or like who Prince Voltan is. You're just kind of zoned into the energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what did you think? So you've seen some of the comic now.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. Listen, I'm biased on a couple platforms of this one. One, I like you, I like your work. Two, I love Flash Gordon, so and I love strips. So the combination of these three things, I'm like, well, like, I'm already in. Without having to, you could have sold me an empty box full of rocks. I would have been like, well, should have probably looked in the box before I bought the box, but. Um, I really, really enjoyed it. Like I said, I like that we hop in the thing. We
Mm-hmm.
the train has left the station and we get dropped off on it, and now we have to figure out what's happening contextually. So the information that you're delivering while we are in motion is what we have to work with, and which is very much how I like stories. I find that in my prose work, I don't do a lot of telling the reader what's going on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my point of view is pretty close to the point of view character. It's not first person, so I'm able to kind of give some information, but not, and I'm not telling you like they felt bad, they felt happy. Like, I'm just letting you kind of buy in with what's happening and the information, so the characters don't know. Like, so if
Mm-hmm.
there's somebody pursuing them and that have not made themselves clear to them, they have no idea. So that, and I'm rarely am I hopping over to the bad guy's point of view to let the reader know. I want it to be a surprise. Like, I want it to, like, and then if I need the reader to know something so they can get anxious about it, I'll let them know about that. But
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, I like the idea of like going, oh, what's happening. I like what's happening. Like the TV show from the 70s. I like it as a storytelling device as well. Um, and the work's great. Like, it's got a really nice feeling to the work. Like, it doesn't feel of before,
Mm.
feel like, okay, well, this feels like Dan's trying to make it look like old school Flash Gordon. Dan's doing Dan, which I think is great, which works out well. I think the style that you have evolved into at this point of your life is one that is super clear and easy to understand. It's not overwrought.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you very much. And that's certainly the hope that, because it's going to be printed, tiny in newspapers. Uh, Clarity is the name of the game. Like you're playing to the back seats,
Yeah.
and uh, and it's because you're telling a science fiction action story with those constraints, you start trying to script it in ways that are conducive to that. Like
Mm-hmm.
you start trying to script things that are bigger. Weirdly enough, like because you're so small, it kind of needs to be bigger so you can see the contrast.
Right.
Yeah, it's well, I'm happy that that's coming across so far.
Yeah, yeah, and your sort of your preamble Sunday that you made is really great because it is a good primer. It gets everybody kind of like, oh, okay, I'm bored. Like in case you don't know, yeah, Flash Gordon. If somehow you missed Flash Gordon in some aspect in the last 90 years, here you go.
Well, I just so last night, I had my dear friend over, and they'd never seen the 80s movie before,
Okay.
the Sam Jones movie, um, and uh, and they were excited. They know that I'm doing the strip, so they wanted to like get acquainted with what the property is, and and by the time that we're on Planet Mongo, by the time they've landed, there's been so many like and then things that have happened. Like, all right, so there's meteorites pelting the Earth, and there's earthquakes, and there's a scientist, and he's got a gun, and there's a football player, and now we're on an alien planet. Like
Right.
so much just happened, and you can live inside that for a while, but I feel like to do it justice, you need to spend so much time in it that by the time we get to the planet, it's been too long.
Right.
So starting out with a strip that just tells you,
Yeah.
here's what the planet's about, like here's what it's like, here's who's in charge, and then by the way, now there's 3 humans. Go enjoy.
It feels like a map key.
Yeah.
Like that's what that feels like. That's here's a little key to the map so you understand how to get your way around on whatever sort of territory you're trying to navigate through.
Well, yeah, I love the Planet Mongo. I've got maps that I reference
Yeah.
from different eras of the comic, and I sort of try and overlay those to find a version of the topography that I want to use. But I think the planet is so cool. I have the classical interpretation where the different kingdoms aren't moons; they're just nations on the planet. I think that's also part of why I wanted to start the comic there. Like why strip number 1, Sunday number 1, is a history of the planet, because this is where we're going to spend the whole series.
Right.
This is like our Westeros,
Okay.
and,
Yeah.
and so I I didn't want to make the planet. I didn't want the planet to feel disposable or transitory.
Mhm.
I want it to feel like this is the place that the story's about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you were talking and I sort of like time traveled and thought of myself like how exciting this would be for me as a kid to discover this. Like, and I think about like all the young people out there who will come upon this and they're going to like it's going to trigger the excitement gene of adventure, of story, of creativity in another generation to come. And like this will be one of those things. Like if they're a kid like me who likes science fiction over other stuff, but loves comics, and it can, like, if you can get that, that overlap happening, well, then you get a person who goes like, well, this is what I really, really want to do, and then you kind of go from there. And like, I'm excited by that, it's because it's not like, no, listen, I'm old and, I'm thinking the newspaper's landing on everyone's, porch every morning,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it's this idea that like this is the thing that's going to be in somebody's household.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stuff is the stuff that is part of your life versus the thing that you have to go and hunt down and discover, which is great in it for a whole myriad of other reasons.
I love that. I love that too. I love I love the thought of being this little artifact in, you know, when I was a kid, when you were a kid, we cut comics out,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a book that I pasted them down in. I had like a little book of comic strips. You put them on the fridge, and the times have changed a little bit. I don't think it's going to be quite like that for kids, but also it's going to be online now.
Yeah.
I have this whole online audience from doing Lavender Jack, this young audience who likes reading comics on the internet, and there's going to be a little chunk of story for them every single day
Yeah.
of the week, for free,
Right.
and that's beautiful. I can't believe that I've had two jobs like this where I get to create something that I would want to read if I wasn't making it, something that's not just exciting but also like kind of humanist and optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
something that I think can make people, that can be fun but also kind of make them feel seen, and
Yeah.
hopefully, and to do that with a weekly and now daily regularity, and to do it for free, like to do it at no cost to the reader. That's
Right.
I mean, what a mitzvah, that's it's amazing.
Yeah. And it's funny. Like, I mean, I have all these talks with all these great people week after week, but then like all these new things pop in my head that I'm like, why did I never like recognize this before? But like, I grew up reading comics. I love comic books. They're like my thing. But man, the strip was like, that was every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was, whether it was funny or it was an adventure or a drama, they were there every day, and I could get my story fill every day. Just grab the newspaper, open it up to that section, and there it is.
Yeah.
And that's why I did not like the New York Times as a kid.
Well, can I ask about your
Yeah,
time
sure.
in Daily Strip?
Yeah, brief passing meteor shower of it. Yeah, and it's funny, I just actually spoke to my studio partner of the time today, because he gave himself a 1 year project to do a daily on Instagram. So he did a daily funny strip, so like 3-4 panel kind of thing, and then he did colored Sundays, and it was great. And he's funny and he's so talented. So every week, I've just been reading these, and then they stopped, and life is busy.
Sure.
And I kept going like, I gotta talk to Eric. I gotta talk to Eric. And then I knew I was going to talk to you today. So I texted him this morning saying, what's going on? Because I need to know, and he's like, oh, well, I gave myself a year to do it. And
Uh-huh.
the year's up. I'm like, oh, because it just ended. He didn't like go like, well, we're on break now. Like, he didn't do a little kind of funny there. So,
Mm-hmm.
so this is 1993,
Okay.
93, 94. And Eric loves strips. That's like, I think his dream job would be to do a daily strip of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing special projects, and still does, but he did special projects for DC at the time. So he was doing all the blister pack. board artwork for the Batman toys that you probably had in your house growing up.
Gotcha. Okay.
So all that kind of stuff is that's Eric. I'd be in the studio and I'd be drawing superheroes punching each other, and then on his table he's drawing like undersea Batman, and that like some
What is his name?
Eric Dozier. It's
Dozier.
Doescher, Dozier, and it's Eric with a K.
Okay.
Yeah. So Eric, I don't remember the whole chain of events, but Eric came home and said, "Hey, you guys," he's like, "You interested in drawing, helping me draw the Phantom?" And I was like, "You mean like the Phantom from the cartoon, like the strip?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, sure." So, and then another friend of ours was sort of doing time in our studio. So we had like 3 people at the most on any day. And so we, scripts came in, like stack of scripts, and we would just start drawing and inking these things. And
do you remember who was writing?
Well, it wasn't. So Lee Falk was the guy. Mm-hmm. And I think Lee was, probably, north of 70 at the time. So I don't think Lee was really doing, I think he had a story idea, and then whomever was his assistant would generate the scripts, and then they went to King, and then they went to us.
I see.
So yeah, so the scripts came in and we started drawing them. And Eric has a very sort of clean linear style, not too dissimilar to you in the sense, but with the Batman animated series having been only a year or 2 old, he wasn't directly influenced by that. He could do that stuff, but his stuff was just naturally very clean and sort of thick lined. Mm-hmm. We're doing that, and then it was also the time that Hellboy came out. And we were like, and being fans of Mignola for a decade of his work, but seeing Mike evolve his style over that period of time, like there was a summer leading up to Hellboy's appearance where Mike did a whole bunch of covers for DC. Like he did like, I don't know, I mean, maybe close to 20. Like it was a big run of covers. And they went from being the, was it Ironheart? He did the graphic novel with Howard Chaykin called Ironheart. Maybe Craig Russell inked it. Sorry if it wasn't him. And that style was what he sort of last had done. And then after that, it's like Hellboy, which they're very different. Like there's just this huge weight difference.
Yeah, when I think of that Legends of the Dark Knight annual cover he did with Batman standing in magma holding a great sword with a big dragon behind him, right? It's that all of a sudden it's Hellboy.
Yes. So that's the period that there was this sort of this, what I call the summer, I'm sure it was much longer than that, but there were just, because we would get the comps and in would come all these comps, and it was just like Mignola cover, like it seemed like they were just like all of his, and it felt like that was his like, test and evaluation period, like from going from what we sort of had known him to do to this what we now know to be this iconic kind of line work. And we were all like on board. We're like, we loved it. And so
you caught the Velvet Underground, and now it was time to make a band.
Totally. So totally. And we started morphing the Phantom Daily into this sort of pseudo Mignola Hellboy look, which after, I'm sure, of a month or so, like somebody was like, in the office, it's like, have you guys actually taken a look at what's happening here? So I eventually we had to change that, tone that back. And then eventually, like, I think they just slowly pulled it away from us. But I think, for Eric, it was the only one who was really super disappointed because he loves strips. And he had a good relationship with Lee. Like they were friends. The man was living in his penthouse apartment off of Central Park,
Boy.
because listen, the man made his bones when the syndicate was the syndicate, and he, was living the artist's dream. And it was quite an interesting place
Boy.
and period. But it was great. It was a grind to do the work. Having three of us made it kind of, at least, that Eric didn't have to do it all himself.
Mm-hmm.
He could just like block it out, or I could block it out, or and then just pass it on to the next person to do the next chunk. And like we were just kind of, it was like a studio, riff.
There's something else. So you guys were physically sharing the studio, right?
Yeah.
That's the dream.
These are the old days. Yeah.
I remember when I was a part of the Helioscope studio back in Portland, which I think we talked about last time we talked. Which of Helioscope, of course, is a collective of comic book artists in Portland, Oregon, where I used to live. It has about 25 or so members, ranging from, like when I joined, I was 25, and the oldest member of the studio was Ron Randall, who I think was 60 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had, Erica Moen, Dylan McConis. You had Jeff Parker and Colleen Coover and Ron Chan. Like, you had people doing such different things, all sharing one space. And every once in a while, a job would come through that required all hands on deck. There was one where it was something like, we've been hired by a big company to do some corporate illustrations. We had to create like 27 illustrations in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so we did that. I penciled everything, and then handed it off to 3 inkers, who handed it off to 3 colorists. And it just felt so good.
Yeah.
It felt like, man, it was like working on the like Dan Dare back in the 60s, where there was like manga style production, where there's like an overseer and assistants, and somebody doing research. They used to have research assistants on comic books. I mean, we used to have a real country. And
this is the platform, huh?
Yes.
Make comics great again. Is that what you're saying?
It's yeah, it's I'm climbing down off my soapbox and trying to remember what we were actually talking about.
We were talking
sharing
about
the studio space. Yeah. That's, I have a pretty solitary setup right now. I'm the only person doing Flash, and I think probably that'll change at some point. I think I might onboard a colorist at some point.
Mm-hmm.
For here at the beginning, I wanted to do it all and kind of get my head around it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty happy with the product so far, but it is lonesome. It's nice having someone else to share that energy with, even if you're not sharing a space.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just sharing a project, that's it can be real easy to forget that you're not the only person in the world when you're up at 4 a.m. inking.
Yeah. So, because one of the things I wrote down here is how are you approaching the body of work? Because I mean, you mentioned earlier when we started talking that you work at night. So, and you say 4 a.m. and my soul just cringes at the thought of being up at that hour anymore. Unless I went to bed at 8 p.m. and then I'll be fine with that. But like, how do you because I mean, it's a very different type of work than traditional comic books in the terms of what it demands as far as a final product and the schedule that is demanded. So how do you approach that for you?
Well, you're right. It's a grind, and I'm finding my footing with it. I'm not quite where I think I want to be, but I'm finding that rhythm. It's a lot of work. It's I mean, 6 dailies and a Sunday. is a lot to begin with, but also there's a lot of other mental gymnastics involved just in the planning of it.
Mm.
Like, it's 7 days, but some papers only get the Sundays or only get the dailies. So you have to tell a story that works with reading those independent of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And some papers only get the bottom two of the 3 rows of the Sunday.
Wow.
So, yeah, so you have to tell a story that can be read over either, what is that, 24? So a story that can be read over either 32 panels or 6.
Okay.
Um, and and obviously you expand on the story during the week.
Mm-hmm.
The the Sundays become summaries of what happened that week, but from the perspective of a different character.
Right.
So we're recapping, but if you're reading it day to day, you're getting a different perspective on it. But it's still a lot to juggle. Some papers publish them vertically, so you have to keep that in mind. Um, it's going to be in color, like the dailies are in color online, and in some papers, but in most papers they're black and white.
Right.
Um, so and some readers are like, it has to be kind of legible to people who can't read the captions always. So it's just a lot to carry in your head. I think of those montages of the X-Men in the Danger Room, like going through the hoop and ducking the fire and dodging the Morning Star machine. Um, but that is also something that will become more secondhand the longer I do it.
Yeah.
And is already starting to feel that way.
Right. It's like playing. Two things I was thinking about. First, I'm a fan of Formula One, and I think about the drivers. Like, they need to learn the course.
Mm-hmm.
And they practice on the simulators, and then they get practice sessions, and that's it. There's no like, hey, well, let's fly over to that track and practice. They don't get that opportunity. It's only these prescribed moments. And like, once they learn that track, then they can start really doing their job. Like, their job isn't just to get around the track. There's a whole level of skill sets that they can employ as, car racers. And I think it's a similar thing like with music. Like, you need to learn the song so then you can actually do the job of a musician.
Yeah.
In the moment of doing the song.
Well, I mean, there's so many new things you need to learn when you're starting a new gig. Be it a set or a series. Like, the Flash Gordon has a big cast, especially for a comic strip. It has so many different characters who are so different from each other, who don't necessarily interact with each other. Flash Gordon lore is like, it's like a Saturday morning friendly version of Dune. And so
I love that. I love that. That's so perfect.
And so part of what's been making it hard for me to get my footing so far is every other day I'm introducing something new. I'm learning how to draw something new. And so that you're carrying that in your head as well. But this week, like the strips I'm doing, that I'll go back to drawing after we finish this conversation, is the beginning of the, all right, now it's Dale, it's Zarkov, and it's Flash, and they're in a spaceship. They're going to a place where they're going to get in some trouble, and they're going to get out of it, and they're going to go to another place. Like, it's getting in that Flash Gordon rhythm, where we're zooming in from the big scope, from the war story we've been telling the first couple of weeks. We're getting into a more condensed adventure story.
Okay.
And already I'm feeling like, all right, this is the groove. This is where I'm comfortable. Because I'm not a science fiction guy.
Okay.
I don't consume a lot of science fiction. I don't dislike it. I but my science fiction tastes trend more towards like Blade Runner.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and so um, there's definitely like I'd never drawn a dog fight before,
Okay. Yeah.
like an aerial dog fight. But
Not pit,
also, what's that?
not pit bulls, but
Right, right. Which I'm sure we'll do at some point,
yeah,
but they've got two heads,
headed
right?
dogs.
Yes. Um, but it's so there's also some switching costs there,
Yeah.
but it also means I don't have a lot of preconceived notions that I'm working around. I think the fact that I come from crime comics
Mm-hmm.
and mysteries, to the point that when I've told certain people, while this was under production before it had been announced, I would tell some colleagues like, I'm doing I've taken over a strip for King Features, and it's kind of a big one, and a surprising number of people said, "Oh, you're doing the Phantom."
Well, yeah, I mean that's you mentioned it before, and you asked me because I worked on the Phantom. Like it is a very much you, from casting. Well, yeah, put Dan in the Phantom. That makes a lot of sense.
Right? But I think that it's like how great Bill Hader was when he made Barry.
Yeah,
Like this guy who we know for his comedy chops, doing something dark and serious and still funny, but in a super bleak Swedish way. And I think that contrast could be really, really exciting.
yep,
And so I'm bringing that to Flash. I'm bringing the the this kind of noir element to it, but it's sublimated. It's noir in the vibe. Because I tell you who else went from doing crime fiction into doing Flash Gordon is Mike Hodge or Hodges, Mike Hodges, who directed the movie. Because before he did Flash Gordon, he did like the hardest, most iconic British crime film ever, Get Carter.
yeah, which is great.
It's so good,
So
and if you see them, they are kind of in conversation with each other. Like you do see the the fingerprints,
mm-hmm.
but I mean, going from uh, yeah, going from something hard like that into something fantastical, there can be a very cool uh, chemical reaction.
Yeah, no, I totally. It's so interesting. I think creative people run into these common themes and issues in their career. Like one of them, style is this big thing. We all talk about style.
Right.
Whether you're writing, what's your voice, or whether it's your art, what's your style. And like I never even thought I had a style, but friends can say, like, oh, I know what your style is. I'm like, well, you can see
Mhm.
it, but I can't see it. And I had a friend who read some stuff from my novel, and they're like, it's so interesting because it's science fiction, but they're going, well, it feels like I'm reading like a hard boiled detective novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, but that's just sort of how I must view the conversation,
Yeah.
there's just sort of this kind of grim frankness to my desire to tell a story, or at least in the way I tell it. So I like that. I like the idea that you're imparting your very sort of crime focused mind into this world of bright color adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing of it. Like I feel like when you hear I'm bringing a film noir element to Flash Gordon, I feel like there's a thing that pops into your head of what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
um, which doesn't account for the fact that my preferred way of coloring myself is super like John Higginsy. Like I like, and part of it is I'm making it really bright because it's going to be printed darker
Mm-hmm.
in newspapers, but I love like yellows and weird soupy greens and like I like color and I don't want color to just fill out the inks. I want color to like add a complete other thing to it. Because
Totally.
you look at um, when we were watching the Flash Gordon movie last night, my friend who's like really into hyper pop and like they love Grimes, right? And Charlie XCX, they were just like going nuts over the costumes and the colors and the weird like tie dye skies.
Mm-hmm.
And I not only do I like that on its own, but just like John Higgins coloring Dave Gibbons in Watchmen or Brian Boland in Killing Joke, you have somebody who's using dark black lines, like big black spotting, and now the colors have that to work against.
Yeah.
You have mint chip ice cream. It's so and by the way, comparing myself not only to one of the best colorists of the 80s, but also to Dave Gibbons and Brian Boland. I'm not drawing a line there.
Oh, listen, dude, I thought if any,
that wouldn't be fair to them. I'm just better.
I didn't find any offense in that. It was you comparing yourself to mint chip ice cream, which was making me pretty upset. And let's be honest, green mint chip ice cream is better than the white mint chip ice cream.
Oh yeah,
hands down. You got to have the color in there.
Yeah, no, nobody has argued otherwise without their pinky extended.
Right? And I'd chop it right off. I would Yakuza their pinky right off for that kind of behavior.
Knock that thing off with those sharp ass white mint chip
nuggets.
Oh God, they're like nuggets. Yeah, oh man, they're like onyx. Those things.
Yes, yeah, and they're precious. No, but I mean, like, listen, color is massive. Like because we have such a powerful, broad gamut of color now available in the publishing world that didn't exist 30 plus years ago. It's exciting because you can because a colorist can now service far closer to like a cinematographer in the process of storytelling than ever before.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great advantages with the tools that we have at our disposal.
I mean, obviously, this is something that I talk about all the time with my collaborator on St. John, my comic St. John, Brennan Wagner.
Perfect.
Because so Brennan and I have known each other for about 10 years at this point. He and I worked together on Spirit with Matt Wagner, which Brennan was instrumental in getting me that gig. And we've stayed friends since. I was in his wedding, and we talk all the time. And he brought me on St. John. Brennan is a colorist who's done fabulous work. He colored Tim Sale's last Batman graphic novel. Mm-hmm. He's coloring a really cool new project called Rogue Kingdom right now, and of course, so much of his dad's stuff. And you see his growth from Shadow Year One up through the new Grendel stuff. Anyway, so we talk all the time about the role color plays in story, and he's somebody who thinks that it's still pretty undervalued, that coloring is still viewed as makeup,
right?
Which is why it's funny the hills I choose to die on. I really don't like when in the crediting of comics the artist is credited before the writer, and I say this as somebody who's been the artist solely on a couple of projects. I don't like that. I don't like it. The right. Crediting should go the person who does their thing first and then second, right?
Sure.
So I'm very old fashioned about that. But when it comes to how we credit people, I'm a little more progressive. Like I don't think it should be artist and colorist. I'm a big fan of line artist and color artist.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that obviously Brennan is also very on board with that. But yeah, we're talking about the role color plays in story. being able to work with somebody so close as I work with Brendan, somebody I've known as long as we've known each other, that is, that's a very cool, incredible, and somewhat modern thing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's cool also to have, you know, you guys are going to work on projects together for years to come. Like there are going to be projects that are going to come and go, and you guys are going to get back together and do these things. And in that, you're going to evolve and grow together in these sort of creative, you know, you know, enmeshments. I don't know, but like I think it's going to be kind of a cool thing to see, when 10, 15 years from now, what you both do together, because it's not going to be the thing that you did together, 8 years ago. Like it's going to be a very different kind of approach because you're going to evolve as humans.
I, for one, am really excited for the sequential work that Brennan's going to be doing just on his own.
Yeah, he shared his first effort as a writer.
The Edgewood Massacre.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is. It's it feels kind of like a one of those cool late '80s Vertigo comics.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And we've talked about doing doing some things where he'll be painting on top of my layouts.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'll do breakdowns that he'll like really expand on, not just coloring or inking me, but really like crafting on top of a skeleton I put down. And I just know that the more of that he does, he's going to end up somewhere so cool on that. I'm really excited to see it.
I think so. I mean, he's unique in the sense that he's sort of birthed into the whole thing, and he's sort of, of his father's sort of vision in so many ways, because how could you not be?
Mm-hmm.
But like, you can see these sort of like Brennan things that pop out and you're like, oh, that's completely him. It's not something of somebody else. This is him. And I think just the more and more he has the opportunity to do these things, and I think getting a chance to, co-write, St. John with you gives him an opportunity to tell a story. And so he can get that feeling of like, okay, like I have more of a sort of stake into what I'm trying to put out here, which will inform his visual, sensibilities. It has to.
Definitely. Yeah, I hope he wouldn't mind my saying, I think Brennan's been on a real sort of journey of self-actualization these last couple of years. He's really kind of figuring out who he is
Mm-hmm.
artistically, not like who he is in relation to his dad or in relation to other artists he admires, but himself.
Yeah.
I don't envy the guy having people. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing, and it's hard to chart even how you feel about yourself when you're born into it in the way that he is. But his sister was born into it too, and she's not doing the work he's doing. She's because Brennan, his dad's his dad, but Brennan is an artist.
Yeah, he totally is.
He has, yeah. It's not like he was just born in. He wasn't born into it in the sense that he didn't have to earn it. So I feel like, I don't know. I just feel like it's a very exciting time to be a Brennan Wagner fan.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I think, listen, I think he is a fearless artist in the terms, like when I look at him color things, I think he's pretty damn fearless. Like he goes after, the page, and he is putting his mark on the page in a way that a lot of colorists may not do that. And I think that it's, and he's not doing it to say, look at me, look at me, look at me. He's doing it to try to like maximize the impact of that story.
Well, honestly, it makes us slower than I think we and everybody else would like us to be, just because, we're really trying to figure stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have long conversations about how the coloring is working, and what we're trying to communicate narratively. Um, because this isn't always correct or healthy or useful, but I am a big believer in the idea that something is late once, but it's good forever.
I love that.
Yeah. Now, that is not something I can adopt on Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon is very much a better, not perfect, than
Well,
not done
tomorrow
situation.
is tomorrow. Like
Yes.
there is no not tomorrow. Like it is. Yeah, it's a calendar.
But I mean, also, I don't know if there's ever going to be. I hope there will, but I don't know if there's ever going to be printed collections of my Flash strip. I don't know what form that will persist in. There are people who are going to read it day to day. There are people who are going to read it like in little fits and starts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I don't know what the body of work as a whole is going to look like. So it is all about momentum.
Yeah.
It's all about we've planted a foot here. Now we're going to plant the next foot. Now we got to keep it pushing
Mm-hmm.
because it's Flash Gordon.
Right.
That's what it's called. That's what it is. That's how you have to think about it. Whereas something like St. John, that's something, if we do take a little more time with it, we can have a book that you know that can be kind of perennial,
Yeah.
evergreen, and not just because it's in Portland.
Well, even though issue 2 does take place in the snow, so
True.
well, um, yeah, it's a very, I mean, it's very cool, and it's interesting how you are coping, straddling in these two sort of environments, because they are, while on paper may look very similar, but they're very, very different in execution.
Well, the St. John team um, has been very understanding of me as I've been getting up to speed on Flash, because both of these projects we thought were going to start in like February, with an eye of getting St. John #1 out in time for Rose City last month in September,
Okay.
which we did, but we didn't really get the go ahead to work on St. John, and I didn't get the go ahead to work on Flash until like the beginning of the summer, and so I'm getting a first issue of St. John put together, learning all of these characters in this visual language, working with Brennan, and not for nothing, doing a bunch of covers and promotional art,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time that I have to do that exact same thing for Flash.
Right.
So, and Flash is very immobile. It's my cat.
The team.
Yes.
It's your cheerleader.
Yeah. Boy, my heckler. Um, and anyway, so just the St. John team has been very understanding, and I like to think that it's been worth it. I like to think that it's a very, I think it's a good book that, like I say, can, I think has staying power.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because it is so different in so many ways to what we're seeing on the shelves in so many respects. And I love this different type of character. It is not. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of an enigmatic quality baked into here, and the point of view being told puts the reader in that who is this kind of, it's just, the structure is really nice and solid for that respect. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't wait to see where you guys go with this.
I'm really glad to hear that. It's funny, we were talking earlier on about how limitations can help you creatively. This wasn't always going to be a dark horse project. Initially, we were approached just to kind of create something in house for Portland Gear, which meant no violence, no crime. It meant like it had to be pretty tame, and so that forced us to think like, okay, well, what does a superhero story look like when you're not punching a bad guy?
Yeah.
And it made us dig down on something a little more positive. a little more, I don't know, uh, given reign to do anything I wanted. This is not the version of the Portland superhero I would have made. And instead, I think we made something a lot cooler,
Mm-hmm.
something informed by, obviously hugely by Brennan's sensibilities. Um, like Brennan wears Portland gear, but
Right.
it looks good on him. It wouldn't look good on me. Um, and although Portland gear looks good on everybody, blah
There
blah.
you go. Nice.
Um, but yeah, no, it's I think something kind of cool and unique happened with St. John, and so far the response has been has supported that.
I can't stress it enough. And, following what you said there, like, don't fight the restrictions that are put up, like that are out there. Like, don't be angry because they won't let you do whatever. Like, you can't just create in a vacuum. You can't
Yeah,
just exist in a vacuum. These things really ultimately become your best tool because they force you to solve problems that you would never come up with.
yeah. I mean, I think something a lot of aspiring creators struggle with is option paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's the right way to jump here? What's the right answer? When honestly, the right answer so much of the time is just, well, a decision has been made either by me or for me, and now we have to work around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I think, yeah, embracing those limitations, letting those be the things that guide your decision. That's not only is that a useful tool for not ending up as a cobweb skeleton at your desk, but also it's a way to access these cool, unique, under the fingernails ideas that you just wouldn't that you would overlook.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And speaking of being a cobweb figure at a desk, how do you, because I mean, listen, there's a lot of stuff you're doing right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have a job that I'm assuming you've never heard the clock tick louder.
Yeah, yeah.
So how, at least at this point, how are you trying to balance a work and life schedule, format, whatever it is for your brain and heart?
Well, it's hard because I am somebody who is very, very emotionally invested in my work, and emotionally invested in my work outside of myself. Like, I'm not very interested myself in being, um, like to me, my name is the least important thing on the cover of anything I do.
I get it.
My name is useful as a categorizing brand that my work can be gathered under. So it's easy to disregard yourself when you look at things that way. But I'm lucky that I have a lot of really loving, engaged people in my life. I've been with my girlfriend Jackie for 6 years, and she's somebody who she's been with me through all of Lavender Jack, through the whole production of St. John and Flash Gordon, and um, we did COVID together, and so this is somebody who is just a very tethering presence to me. My friend Bryn, who I watched Flash Gordon with last night, there's somebody who's been been a real source of support to me. Somebody who just reminds me that I have value.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's surprising how A, that can be hard to remember, and B, uh, this is the A finger, this is the B finger, apparently. Um, so it can be, you just need to hear it from somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't, cobweb skeletons can't make comics.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I just want to ask one thing about going back to Flash Gordon, because something that's been around for so long
Mm-hmm.
has something that, St. John doesn't have. It doesn't have a built-in subculture. Like there's generations of people who've been fans of Flash Gordon, and inherently the thing you're making is going to be first received by those people because they're the ones who are eager for something in that
Yeah.
respect. So it'll be interesting how the navigation happens with it, with what their reception is and how they perceive it. But also, like, have you engaged, have you reached out, or not saying, hey, I'm doing this to them, but like, have you gone into those corners and looked to see what they're all about?
I've done that a bit.
Okay.
And I've had a couple of long conversations with my old studio mate Jeff Parker, who wrote Flash Gordon for Dynamite, both that great series he did with Evan Shaner, and then other follow up projects like he did a Defenders of the Earth series with. I mean, it wasn't called Defenders of the Earth, but it was that team.
That team, yeah.
That he did with the wonderful the late great Jesse Ham. So I talked with him about the kind of running ideas I had past him to get the flavor not just of somebody who knew the canon really well, but somebody who is from a different generation, who's a little bit more closer to the age cohort.
Yeah, he's my age.
Yeah, exactly.
Old.
In the prime of his life.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
And but in terms of fan groups, I don't want to run to a situation where I'm shooting for something I think they want. I'd rather.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because you don't want to run to a situation where you're only writing for people who are already fans of it. Like, you want to make something that really stands on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a fan, you'll like that it's a cool, good thing in the flavor you like.
Yeah.
And if you're not a fan at all, if you're coming to Flash Gordon because you read Lavender Jack and,
Sure.
and you want to see what the next thing I'm doing is, or it's just a different looking thing in the newspaper. Like, I want it to have its own personality that stands out in front of that. And I kind of don't trust myself enough as a kind of a people pleasing person to not let the opinions of fan communities infect me.
I get it. No, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes it's not, and I don't think it's a rejection thing for creators to share things before they're out there with other people. It's not rejection. It's not negative that they're worried about. I think it's a fear of influence.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us don't want somebody to say something, and I'm not even saying in a damaging fact, like in the fact of them saying something and you go, damn it, that's a really good idea. And like, and somehow to not have that sort of like at least shift, the course of what you're thinking. Because even though it may not be something you say, I'm going to do this, it's there, that's danger.
It's true. Certainly not before you've established what you think of it. Like, once you get, I don't know. Once you get a little more immovable.
Yeah. Because I mean, I think once you sort of eventually establish your thing, I don't think it becomes a big problem. But I think when you are first making the thing and developing it, that's where you are the most vulnerable. And I don't think anyone's going to like steer George R.R. Martin off of whatever he wants to do, if he ever chooses to finish his book series.
Right.
But like early on, I'm sure that's when he was probably, people might have said something and he'd been like, oh, I wonder if, like.
I mean, it's just a different version of like clumsily pandering to an audience. Like, I mean, it's the iconic, new Nancy panel, Sluggo is lit.
Right.
You can't, you just can't, you have to have an audience in mind when you write. Like, you have to be talking to somebody. It has to be a dialogue, but it has to be, you have to be using your own voice. You can't you can't be fake. People can always tell.
The smell, it's like, it's all these people who think they can make like a kids thing. Like, oh, we'll make a
Yeah.
thing for kids and kids will love it. I'm like, man, you picked the hardest audience in the world. Like,
Yeah.
they are so good at spotting a fake. Like, they're just like, they see you coming a million miles away. Go after middle-aged people. We're easy to fool.
You're not so wrong about that.
Yeah.
Which, like, hopefully my new middle-aged audience will have that reaction to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't like, the things I've always like felt with your work, and even going to your sort of your like 2-3 panel little like idea things you put out there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know what I'm speaking about, I guess it's still like, I guess you'd have to go to, I'm saying it, Twitter. So you have to go to Twitter, and like, those things are still up on Twitter, right? Like, did you
Oh
do?
yeah.
Okay, so you can track it down.
It's up on Twitter. It's up on Instagram. It's
oh yeah, they're on Instagram too. So if you feel safer, go there. But I don't care. But like, those are very cool, but they're very you. Like, it's
Mhm.
that's as you get. I gotta say. So I don't know, and I get a very strong sense of that same stuff from what you've shared with me as far as Flash Gordon goes. So I think I think you were you. You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
And honestly, I think you're right. I just can't fake it. I can't. I can be as understanding a version of myself as I can, a version of myself that tries to meet you where you're at. But I can't fake something I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I just I don't have the temperament for it, I guess. And if people are liking it so far, people are liking my work, on the Spirit, on Lavender Jack, on the Even Steven stuff I've done with Carl Kessel, or even weird, little internet things that I've done, like Yona meets John's brother, or that Dr. Fate 80th anniversary fan comic. Like, if people have vibed with it so far, I think they'll continue to.
Just thinking you had to stack that in there. Even Steven had to be stacked in there with this workload because of the Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, yeah. I did 4 Even Steven stories for Carl over the course of 2 years,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, those were always squeezed in tight in between episodes of Lavender Jack.
Jeez.
Yeah, I'm, part of what I'm looking forward to with Flash Gordon is something that will make it kind of impossible for me to kind of take other work,
Yeah.
and to have a steady gig
Yeah.
that I can clock in with, and I can do my work without without scrambling all the time,
Yeah.
without getting pitying looks from my girlfriend.
There's an amazing solace that can be found in this, constancy. Like, if you can get that in your creative endeavor or in your life, then like, it opens up a lot of pathways for the space for you to create the next thing. And
Yeah,
whether it's the thing that you're doing, but it allows you to go, okay, I can breathe and I can see things a little bit better here. What can I do? And
yeah,
I think it's a great thing to recognize that now, even when you are probably feeling as though you are struggling the most because you're trying to like get the equilibrium, there. But it's very cool. I know some of what you're going through. I didn't write anything, so I know some of what you're going through, and I know how tough that is. Let alone writing. Listen, writing is a tough chore to begin with, and yeah, it's cool. Is this why you work at night? Is it, so there's no distraction? Is that?
yeah. It's when nobody's bugging me.
Okay.
Although even still, because people know I'm always awake, and so at 4 a.m. last night, I was up working, and I got a call from an old friend I picked up, and she was like noticeably like unmoored by it. She's like, "Oh, I was going to leave you a shitty voicemail." And then you got to get up pretty early in the morning
Yeah.
or extremely late in the day to
It's like
to
9
catch me.
o'clock in the morning. That'll get you.
Yeah. Speaking of the relentless flow of time, I unfortunately I got to make a move here.
Let's do the wrap up here.
Okay, cool. St. John #1 is in comic shops and available online right now. There will be 4 more issues that are going to come out between now and the summer, and those will all be available through Dark Horse, and they get like progressively better. The first issue is pretty good, but I think people are really going to be happy with it by the end. And then in the meantime, Flash Gordon, the first Flash Gordon strip lands October 22nd, and this Sunday at time of recording, and it will be out every single day for at least the next 52 weeks.
Amazing.
And for that'll be in newspapers, but it'll also be on the King Features Comics Kingdom website. And if people follow me on my social media, be it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, I'm Dan Schkade everywhere. My first and last name is my made up Czechoslovakian last name is I have that. Whenever a new platform pops up, I grab it. And on all those platforms, I will be posting a link to the new strip every day.
Awesome.
So it'll be you will have to actively want to miss it in order to miss it.
Yeah. You'll have to go to like some sort of crazy lost AOL platform to avoid it. And I'll have all the links in the description so people can go right to them. So they'll be able to find you and find it.
Excellent.
Yeah. Man, thanks for talking. It's great to have you back.
This was so good. I had a lovely time talking with you and talking about this weird new career path of mine with somebody who knows it from the inside,
yeah,
and who has this perspective on it. It's been, as we're talking, it was announced to the public today. It was announced to the public
right.
About 8 hours ago, and so this is the first conversation I've had about it since then, and it's been very, very good conversation. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's absolutely my pleasure, my friend. And we will do it, I'm sure, in the future.
Soon, I hope. Yeah.